how did you choose what data to evaluate tied to Webcor's carbon footprint? And how do you capture and track that information? Like, what does that process look like? It seems like a bit of a bear, to say the least.
Definitely. One of our corporate social responsibility goals was to do just that, to create our carbon footprint. So we started with something we thought was pretty achievable, looking at our scope 1 and 2 emissions, identifying what those sources of our emissions are in those categories, and then looking at what data we had on each of those sources. I think one of the things that we had to kind of work through, and I think this is good for anyone who's starting and doing their carbon footprint, is that we don't have perfect data. We haven't been measuring all these things historically, but we don't want that to let us stop that initial measurement, because once you get something measured, then you can look at how to improve the quality of that data and then ultimately how to reduce it. So scope 1 and 2 is where we started. I think there's, we're a California builder, so there's a lot of legislation coming through that is also starting with scope 1 and 2. So I think we're ahead in that regard, that we've now been through a couple evaluations. We've got higher quality data. We're putting in place, tracking mechanisms that are not only manual, we're starting to automate those processes. So it's definitely a journey where we're still very much in process. So scope 3 is something that we're just starting to get different sources that we can track, but a lot of room to grow. And I think I don't get discouraged by the amount of things we're tracking now. I think we want to track as much as possible, and that's going to continue to evolve.
Yeah, it makes sense. And can you do me a favor, and could you qualify what scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 encompasses as well? I'm candidly, I'm not super familiar with the detail, and so I think it'd be helpful to just make sure people understand what's captured in those different levels.
Sure, and I'm speaking for our business. So scope 1 is your direct emissions, so things like your emissions from your fleet, if you have natural gas in your offices, those kind of things. And then scope 2 is your indirect emissions, so where you're purchasing electricity from the grid. And then scope 3 is the upstream and downstream emissions that are not included in either scope 1 or 2.
Okay. It's so interesting to be able to get that granular over time as well. But there is importance in thinking about that. I mean, a small scale example that I think about sometimes is, just ordering a bunch of stuff online versus going to the store. And I occasionally be like, gosh, like somebody has to drive to my house every single time I get this one single thing. And, you can't source everything locally, of course, but it's such a interesting balance of, I think, convenience in the consumer market, at least for that regard, versus, how is this impacting the environment if the UPS guy has to drive to my house, 3 times a week versus, once every month or something. And I know that's, narrowing that down very considerably, but it's not something everybody thinks about.
Yeah, and I think that that example is a good example of both emissions and waste, right? So all of these convenient measures can cause unnecessary emissions, but also maybe disposables or things that go into the waste stream that can't readily be reused.
Yeah, I can think of so many times where I open a box where I've ordered something, the size of my fist or a basketball or something, and it's a box that's 4 feet by 6 feet filled with a bunch of packing material. You just kind of stand there and look at that and you go, why has this happened? And I think we can be really intentional, and it's cool. I'm excited to learn a bit more about what your team is doing. And you mentioned your fleet vehicles a minute ago, and that was the biggest driver of emissions at Webcor. Can you tell me more about this initiative and what those challenges that you faced as you started shifting your fleet from being a gas-powered predominantly fleet vehicles to more EVs?
That initial carbon footprint effort where we looked at our scope 1 and 2, one of the major drivers for doing that was to see how our kind of carbon pie lined up so that we could decide what would be the biggest area to tackle and make, successful reductions. So like you mentioned, the fleet vehicles consistently over 60% of our scope 1 and 2 carbon footprint. So an easy to identify that as an area to start our emissions reductions. So like I mentioned, I'm on the design side. Fleet vehicles is a new area for me. So I've learned a lot about vehicles in the last couple of years. I think some of the things we wanted to overcome were the perception that, there's a lot of perception around electric vehicles as having, limited range or difficult to maneuver, all these things. Some of the things that have come online recently with, our vehicle fleet also, I should mention, the biggest piece of that is light duty trucks. So you think about, we're a contractor, the superintendent vehicles, those F-150s, that kind of size of truck getting that user to transition to a Prius, not very attractive. So historically, that has not been successful. But now with the new vehicles coming on the market that really have a lot of the same capabilities as those traditional, light duty trucks, it's starting to become, or we've seen it become, a more viable option. So we did some internal surveys to really get like, what are the things people are thinking about. Range anxiety came up consistently. Also, infrastructure, that there isn't charging at home, office, job site, all of these things. Those were kind of the two primary. And then, I think that just it's new. Yeah. And that's like, we don't really know how to do this. Also, there were some positives about carpool lanes, EV lanes, these kind of things that, depending on where people were commuting from, could be seen as a real benefit to having an EV. So on the policy side, we worked to evolve our EV policy. We really felt like, based on the survey, and then we asked for volunteers, we really needed some incentives right now to get those critical mass early adopters into these vehicles. So we have a higher vehicle allowance. You get a little bit more money for your vehicle if you choose an EV. And then you also were doing some incentives to set up home charging. So like a one-time incentive for that, and then electrical cost stipend monthly after that. And if you're in a position where you're, in an apartment or you can't add an EV charger, then we, allow that to be charged on a card so that you can charge at, charging stations. Nice. So it's definitely not a perfect solution. I think infrastructure has to catch up to a lot of these things. But right now we have done some post-EV adoption surveys and a lot of good comments. I think there's still room to be done to get charging, in more places, but it's been overall pretty successful.